Good morning, Ezra. All right.
You need me to hand out those handouts?
I think I appreciate that volunteers, the spirit of volunteerism. I appreciate that. All right, yalla. I tried to cut down on the number of trees that we had to use this morning. So I had a 6-pager, then a 5-pager. It's like, okay, we'll do one side, one double-sided sheet. All right. All right. Good morning, everybody, wherever you are. And Caroline, good morning.
Good morning to you.
We're ready to go. As soon as you have the Birchot Torah, we're good to go.
Oh, this is great. You're doing this. This is great.
You ready?
Yeah.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kirishanu Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu Asok B'Divrei Torah. Okay. All right. So back to our last week, at least I'm going to try my best every week to learn a little Chassidus with you guys and avoid these much longer shurim, these classes with 25 different sources from beautiful sources from Midrashim and all this other stuff. So I'd like to just learn a couple of pieces of Chassidus, of Chassidut, of the literature of the Hasidic lineage in the particular way that it is constructed. Just to remind people, and also just a taste of a class that I've been giving now on Mondays. That is a class on the Hasidic masters, which is itself a derivative of the class that I did almost every day for the entire pandemic, and then a little bit after that as well, where we went through the Torah of different Hasidic masters. And this year, right now, we're on the third Hasidic master, which will begin on Monday. Which the first one was the Baal Shem Tov, and then of course the successor to the Baal Shem Tov was the Maggid of Mezrich, Dober of Mezrich. And so the unique contribution of the Hasidic literature is that it is absolutely contiguous with all of the literature of the Midrashic literature and other approaches to text, which is to expound upon a text and to try to seek its meaning behind its meaning, and using all kinds of intertextual, another text here, text there, and bringing it together to bear on one particular text. But the approach of the Hasidic masters is decidedly in the vein of what my Rebbe, Rav Zalman Sheker Shlomi, would coin the phrase psycho-spiritual, that it asks questions that are kind of the inner world of the individual and trying to define that inner world within a text that is decidedly talking about a very, outer world, like an external world, right? So we're going to do that a little bit, but a little bit of context for this text is from the Ma'or Shemesh. The name of this Rebbe was Clemens Kalma Shapira. Clemens Kalma, not Shapira, he was the predecessor he was named for. The Clemens Kalma Shapira, the predecessor, was named for the Ma'or Shemesh. And this is like a third generation Hasidic master. And what he's going to be talking about, before we go into it, let's talk a little bit about the beginning of the Parsha, okay? So Parsha Va'era. So basically, Shmos, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach are the four basic Exodus Parshiot, right? So the book of Exodus begins with these four Parshiot. Really, let's just, in terms of chapters, we didn't have chapters or Parshiot really. Like this, the first words, Ve'ele Shmos B'nai Yisrael, all the way until the Song of the Sea. If we take that chunk, in our sacred literature, those 15 or so chapters, or that text, is essentially bringing us from the Israelites in the post-Joseph world. Joseph has died, and all the brothers have died basically when the book essentially opens in that way. And we're in the generations after the existence of the Israelites in the land of Egypt, or the land of Mitzrayim, and we move from the birth of the Redeemer, from Moses, all the way through Moses' his own exile, his own self-imposed exile, or he's running away, his fugitive status to the land of Midian. He marries, then he comes back, and God's call comes to him in last week's Parsha, in Shmos, and we know Moshe refuses until he finally goes, and then he goes again, and everybody he's like rejected he's rejected whole cloth by all the Israelites. Everybody kind of rejects Moshe. Moshe despondently in the end of last week's Parsha comes back to God, It says, what are you, like, what did you say? Why did you send me? It made it worse for the Israelites in the moment that you introduced me to them. It's just gotten worse for them, and so why? And so Moshe is resistant, the election of Moshe is resistance, and then his final capitulation becomes the great redeemer, comes back to Pharaoh, and then the story of Pharaoh begins, and the warnings, and the plagues, and the plagues begin this week's Parsha. We move through the plagues until we get to almost to the penultimate plague, and Bo is next week's Parsha, which will bring us to the last three plagues, and the last three plagues will then, bring us through Parshat Bo into, Makkah Bechorot at the end of Parshat Bo, which is the plague of the firstborn, which will catapult the Israelites out of Egypt, and then the confrontation at the sea will bring us to the great moment of the Song of the Sea, and we'll be through on the other side, so to speak, only now to then struggle with being on the other side and what that means to be free, right? So all four of these portions will bring us, right, out of Egypt. And in this week's Torah portion, it begins with these very strange words. But that God says to an angry Moshe, Moshe who's come back to God and said, Lama ha're'osa lama zeh shalachtani? Why did you deal evilly with this people, and why did you send me? God has said to him, he opens this way, he says, I appeared to Avram, to Yitzchak and Yaakov, Be'el Shaddai, Ushmi Adonai lo nadati lahem. He says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the name of El Shaddai, but my name of Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, of the four-letter name of God, of this, right, of the Tetragrammaton, I have not made myself known to them, or they have not known me, right? So strange, right? It's almost like, and then God says, therefore tell them, right? Therefore go tell them that I am Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, and I've sent you. So this from the classic midrashic, the classic commentators, let's say the Midrash and the Talmud, right? The Midrash and Talmud, the first millennia commentators, and the medieval commentators, all of them are struggling with what does this mean? First of all, how odd is it? It's a very odd moment. Like Moshe comes to complain to God about this resistance to redemption and resistance to him as a leader, and God says, listen, let me tell you a little bit about my names. Let me give you a crash course on names, on God names. Like there's divine, are we in like a 19th century, German textual criticism? Like since when is like the name of God in the Torah seems to be completely all over the place. Sometimes it's Elohim, sometimes it's Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, sometimes it's El, sometimes it's, it's Adonai Tzvaot, it's Adonai Elohim, it's like Shaddai, like so all of a sudden now the names, and what's the significance of saying it here? So first the comments are like, what's going on? Why are we talking about names? Number two, is it really even factually correct? Did God not? What does it even mean? I did not make myself known to them in Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei is all over the book of Genesis, right? It's not just. What does it mean? If it means that I didn't appear as Yud-Kei if it means that the text didn't use that God name in the texts that are around the patriarchs, you could just open up the book and if that's what it means, it's just not true, right? So it can't mean that. I mean, it could, but that would, for them, that was bothersome. And thirdly, why is it significant at this point? What is the significance of this statement in response to the particular moment that we're in? Like, what Moshe comes back and says, like, this is what's happening. God says, listen, what? Okay. So we have a number of answers to that, right? So does anybody know any of the answers that are classically given to this problem? Anybody remember? Maybe somebody online, any of our onliners? The classical way to understand this difficulty. Well, I mean, on symbols level, let's just imagine. Forget about the classical commentators. What would be if you were like Gesundheit, Occam's razor? Like you're trying to find what's like the most elegant answer for this textual assertion, and it's seeming like it's not verifiable or it's not credible. What's the most elegant answer would be that we're dealing with different text, right? Like we're dealing with different editor. The editor did a sloppy job, right? It's just like There's a variant
It's
here.
a stitch.
It's a stitch, like it got stitched in, strange. I mean, that's not very satisfactory, but probably the most elegant way to say, oh, wait a second. Okay, what could be another answer here? That maybe El Shaddai, yeah,
We don't have to have one name.
right.
I mean, we have a multifaceted universe. You know, there's the depiction of the 10 Sphirot to depict the attributes of God. I mean, why can't there be 10 names or 1,000 names?
Totally. But how,
Hey,
well,
Rabbi David, could you reiterate what she said, please?
yeah, I can.
Thank you.
We're gonna have to, yeah. Beth said, why can't we have multiple, do you want to say it? You could just move the microphone.
Sorry, I didn't think about the microphone. I was saying that why can't we have more than one name? In fact, why can't we have 10 names or 100 names or 1,000 names?
We do, right? It's true. We have many names of God. Muslims have many names of God. Okay, so there are multiple names. The text seems to indicate that there are multiple names. Like the text is not saying I only have one name. The text is saying I didn't make this particular name known to them, but to you, I'm now going to be revealed in this name, which, again, okay. So there are multiple names, and sure. Um,
The meanings of the names are different.
The meanings of the names are different, right? So what is the meaning of the name? Can you all hear Paul? We're trying to gauge how loudly we have to speak in order for it to be heard. Did you all hear?
What's in a name? And the times are dramatically different now in Egypt than they were before. And so the meaning of Yud He Vav He or any of these other names is dramatically different than it is now versus what it was then.
So great. So the different names show up in different times. But the problem, of course, is that if you're trying to understand how God's name, if you understand the verse to mean I did not use that name, it's just not true. So how does it? So yeah, there are different names, different times. So you'll see in a moment that Rashi it's a deep problem for Rashi. He'll try, like I said, so he's going to focus on answering the question by focusing on the meaning of the word known to them. Right? You could focus on the facticity of it, and you could say, oh, it's not true. But the way out of that would be to say that there's something in the way that God described the usage of the name that is, like, again, unverifiable. It's more subjective than it is objective. I clearly used the name Yud He Vav He, but there's something about the Yud He Vav He that didn't fully land for them, which would be like a little bit like what Paul was saying, like the name is used in different contexts and for different purposes, and therefore, right, the way that it's being employed now around Egypt is different than the way that it was employed in the prior generations. And so to focus on that kind of experience of the name, as opposed to whether or not it was actually used, becomes the way out of this conundrum, right? So let's go into I know that, Mark has his hand up. Go ahead, Mark. And then Jay.
Well, I was just going to, as you might expect, I was going to go to the Kabbalists and talk about the parts of theme. And, they say that aside from the fact that each of the Sphirot is associated with one of the divine names, then Luria comes in with the concept of the faces, that, there are groups of Sphirot which are in fact what humans interact with, because humans can't interact with the divine at its level of Ein Sof. So we have these groupings of Sphirot called Partsufim, which are the different faces, each of which has a different name and a different quality. A lovely explanation. I think it's a good, I like to use it because, of course, I think of it in relationship to tarot and the court cards. But, I also think that really, the divine has so many faces, as many faces as there are humans and more. When you get down to it, one of my favorite stories is an Arthur C. Clarke science fiction story called The 10,000 Names of God. And anyway, so that's me just meandering on the subject.
Yeah, so we're going to go there a little bit. So it's good that you brought in Kabbalah. Let's see, this group is very founded on Kabbalah. We're going to get to the Kabbalah in a second. It's nice to have you introduce that. Jill and then Jay, and then we're going to go into the text to see what more of a Shemesh has to say this morning. Yeah, Jill, go ahead.
So I know there's a part that says in the Torah this is know before who you stand. And so basically God's kind of, saying that he has standing. This is, do you know who you're addressing? And then the same thing, I remember when I first became a lawyer, I was so excited about my case. I would just go straight into the case and the judge had to stop me and he would say, and I'm speaking to, and you're representing who, so I had to remember to introduce my name first. And so I think there's something about that. Introducing my
Yeah,
name.
it's great. Great. Like, know to whom before you stand. The word da, which will also appear, it's a very important word in the story of Exodus. The word da'at, or the verb to know or knowing, is a very, very important word in both God's, in the way that the Bible depicts God's knowing and knowing what we know about knowing in the book of Genesis. Knowing in the book of Exodus is also equally intimate. And so there's both the question of before whom you stand, but also the intimacy that is invited. And then Kabbalah das has a very particular quality, and we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, and you are, that's like, and you are representing, that's great. So who are you addressing, and who is sending you? Like, what quality is the quality that has sent you, or what person? In Kabbalah, we might say, with what name are you standing here? Is a good question, right? Okay, great, Jay, and then we're going to go into the more of a Shemesh.
I think this is related to what Paul said. I think the structure of the verb hints to us that it's not about the transmitter, but rather about the receiver and what the receiver is capable of hearing.
Right. That's very much, that's in the vein of Rashi. So let's go into Rashi, who's like, we're going into the teaching from this Hasidic Rebbe, but he'll quote Rashi and then use Rashi as a departure point. Rashi again is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki from the 11th century in France, the greatest commentator, arguably the greatest commentator of the rabbinic Jewish tradition in the post-Talmudic period. Va'er el Avram el Yitzchak el Yaakov el Shaddai, and I appeared to Avram, Isaac, and to Yaakov. El Shaddai, Shmi Adonai lo nodati lahem. Lachein emor lebnei Yisrael ni Adonai. And so it begins by quoting Rashi. I wanted to save the amount of ink, and so I put Rashi over there on the screen, so just so we could save ourselves from having to print it. So you have an added source. So just to unpack the Rashi that he will refer to in a moment. So if you want to, for those who are in the room, stay on the page for a second, because you'll see he'll quote Rashi. But if you want the fuller Rashi, it's going to be over on the screen. Lohodati. No, stay on the screen. What happened? All right. Ushmi Adonai lo nodati lahem. Lohodati ein ksiv. Rashi says it's not written lohodati. My name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh I did not make known to them, which would imply what? That I didn't use this name, or the name wasn't written in the Torah. But rather, lo nodati, lo nikarti lahem b'midat amitut sheli. That I was, by my name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, I was not known unto them. In other words, they didn't grasp it, all right? It wasn't available to them in some way. And then he unpacks that, like, that I wasn't recognized by them, lo nikarti lahem, b'midat amitut sheli, in the quality, midah is an attribute of quality, of keeping, right, of truth, really. He says keeping faith. It says amitut is truth. I don't like it when translations don't take the literal, or at least put the literal into some ellipsis of sorts, some kind of parentheses. But like in the quality of keeping faith, amitut here is my truth quality, because that matters in the teaching of the Rebbe, because the word truth has a Kabbalistic valence that keeping faith doesn't. She'aleh nikra shmi Adonai Hashem, or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay, that name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is connected to this quality of amitut, of truth. Ne'eman le'amei devarai, right? This is where he took it from, right? Which is that I am trustworthy that my words will come to fruition, or amet, that they'll be shown to be true, veridical. Sharei hiftachtim v'lo kiyamti. For indeed, I made promises to them, but did not fulfill them during their lifetime. Now, this is a remarkable thing. There are things that were promised to the patriarchs that did not come true in their lifetime, but they came true in temporally much later on, like in the continuum of time. Somehow, truth, the word emet, has the quality of fulfillment of a vow or of its completion, if not in the moment, though, over time, in a durative way, not in a punctive way, not like in this moment, but over time. The word itself, you guys notice I say this, but the word emet is already saying that, because the word emet, which is truth, has the first letter and the last letter, which the Talmud says that's what truth is, the first and the last.
In the middle.
And the middle, right? It's also the word from the first letter to the middle, mother, aim, and from the middle letter to the end, it's mate, it's death. So womb to tomb, the full truth unfolds in, maybe not in a lifetime, but maybe in multiple lifetimes, right? Jacob, right? In Jacob's lifetime, he didn't see his family redeemed, but they weren't yet slaves, but they would become. So Rashi seems to be pointing in the direction out of this conundrum, right? So it's not that I didn't use the name, I used the name, but something about the essential quality of that name could not have been known to them, because one of its qualities is keeping my promise, right, over time. So he's going to work with that, and he's also going to work with some of what Mark brought around the Kabbalah and the different qualities of God. So let's go there, okay? We are in the text in the Hebrew on the left side, where it says, Lahavin hadvarim. It's like 6 lines down. There's a little v'chulei, vav, chav, vav, and like a chupchek there. You see that? It says, like v'chulei. And in the English, it would start, in the paragraph, it starts, to understand this matter more deeply, on the right side. A little bit further below the Hebrew. They're not exactly aligned, okay? With me? In order to understand these matters, the Havina Dvarim Bipnimius, which means on the Kabbalistic level or on the psycho-spiritual level, like to understand how all of this has to do with me and you sitting here in Krakow in the end of the middle of the 19th century, like the inner place. It appears to me that Avraham Avinu, that Abraham, our father, lakach lemidaso midas chesed, took for himself the quality. The word midah here means attribute or quality, attribute of chesed. This is Kabbalistic, like 101. Kabbalese 101. Like Abraham represents the archetype of loving kindness. I love that he says that he took for himself. I mean, it's funny. Like, okay. I mean, Kabbalah placed on Abraham, based on all kinds of understandings of Abraham's life and words here and there that were chosen very specifically to attribute this quality in their system, that the quality of loving kindness, which is an important feature of Kabbalah, that the world is based upon the 10 qualities of the divine, 7 of which we have access to, and there are 7 personae who are the embodiment of that quality. And Abraham is the quality of loving kindness. And then, right, and he served the blessed Creator through that quality of expansion, love, generosity, all the qualities that have to do with chesed. And then along comes Isaac, Uba Yitzchak Avinu, v'lakach lemidaso midasa pachad. And along came Isaac, our father, our patriarch, and took to himself the attribute of fear. Fear here means what gevura or din, meaning like limits, limitation, and awareness of the opposite of expansion, more constriction, right? And he says, leida, to know the is din, the is daya. In other words, Isaac represents, in the Kabbalistic language, karma, right? There's like every action has a consequence. Not all loving kindness. In fact, it's the opposite of loving kindness. It's about being bound. right? Isaac is Mr. Bound, that's his super, it's both his karmic pain and his superpower. He didn't leave the land of Israel, like he stayed put. He didn't go anywhere. He needed to be the linchpin between the first generation and the next. So he was a good franchisee. So he didn't change the formula. It was the same ingredients from the mother store, went to Isaac, and he was bound. He wasn't interested in exploring, maybe. Anyway, so he becomes a quality of being a conduit because of its capacity to be to transfer, right? He was limited. He has that quality of what's called pachad, which means kind of like an awareness of limits and danger. Uba Yaakov Avinu, and Jacob, our father, came, v'lakach l'midaso midas harachamim. And Jacob came and took the quality of the attribute of mercy, of compassion, which is wild. Shehu habariach hatichon, yoshev ohalim, kayadua misifrei kodesh. He is the bariach hatichon. Does everybody know what? And the middle pillar, like the bariach tichon is the pillar that goes through the ark when the ark is being carried. You know that pillar that goes through to hold. So he's called he's the middle pillar, meaning the one through whom everything he's the one that passes between the two loops and binds them. Right? If you imagine Abraham here and Isaac here, the middle pillar holds them together, and that's why he's called the one who sat in tents. It doesn't say he sat in a tent; it said in tents, plural. Which are the two tents? The tent of Abraham and the tent of Isaac. He sat right and brought them together. So he is in Kabbalah the middle pillar in what later becomes the depiction of the Sefirot into this tree of life, the arboreum, kind of like the quality of the tree. And if there are two branches, the middle, as it were, trunk is Jacob. Jacob is there in the center to hold the two pieces together, right? The two extremes. If you're thinking in terms of polarity training, right? If the right leg, the left leg, everything in the middle holds the balancing point between the two of them, right?
Just to clarify the architecture.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between the pillar in the middle and the fact of dwelling in
So
is it like the circus tent?
I just recognize that there are multiple, like for someone who's deeply spatial as you are, I realize I just use two completely separate
No, I love it.
images.
I love it.
One is moving from right to left and combining in one. So in the image of the Kabbalah, interestingly enough, it's represented vertically, but the vertical dimension is also pulling together from the sides. So almost like if you were to imagine the center is both moving this way, but also this way, like we just see what I just did there. Yeah, you see that? Yeah. I mean, that's right in the right place, right?
It's a blessing.
It's a blessing. That's actually the image. The image of Jacob is that he is the heart. He's Tiferet also. Rachamim or compassion. There are multiple names for the very same thing. So he is the one who blends and mediates between the polarity, the extremes. So his quality is the one who is the measured one, the one who measures or that knows how to measure these two extremes. The quality of Jacob is the one who is appropriately pulling together each of them and making peace between them. So Jacob is associated with peace, with wholeness, believe it or not. So does that help the architecture?
It does help the architecture.
Thanks for me. I was like, what am I cracking? All right, so Jacob is now the tent dweller. The two tents being the tent of his father and the tent of his grandfather, right? Now he says, V'hinei, kiyuma olam, the sustainability of the world, like the world could not be sustainable with only the quality of loving kindness. He says he wants to draw. He says, like, in the Bible, those who were in the ark and those who were in Sodom, like he said, like there can be too much. If there's too much chesed in the world, it can be misused, right? Without enough boundaries, right? There's something extreme in that, right? There's not he's probably referring to sexual sins, but let's just for a moment Meaning like a world without boundaries would not be a world that would be sustainable. Too much love. By love here, it doesn't mean like the love we have for our fellow humans from the place of dignity, but love meaning a world without limits. A world without limits. A world without no is not a world, right? Without, like, this is my body, my choice. Like, just without that, that's not sustainable. And the other extreme, the quality of Isaac, גם כן לא היה אפשר שתהיה הנהגת עולם, דהיינו שעשה דין תכף בעוברי עבירה גם כן, לא היה יכול העולם להתקיים. Says if the world was pure karma without compassion, if the minute you did something, you were immediately punished or you immediately felt its pain, right? That would also not be a world that would be a world that could be sustainable. I mean, imagining that with, you know, that you can imagine a world where it's so bound and there's no, where everything is exact and precise in quite that way would be a world that would be impossible to live in, a moral universe in which moral and ethical effects or the consequences of seeds planted was immediate. It would not be, there'd be no place for redemption. There'd be no place potentially for mistakes to happen and then be corrected, right? So he's worried about a world that's only Isaac-y and not enough of, right? It's too extreme, too extreme. The only way the world can survive, he says, is the quality of Jacob, which is mercy, which is compassion. Shuhi tamazgut, a mixing, a dinin berachamim. Like it's a quality of intermixing of loving kindness with limits and or expansion and constriction, right? Which is itself the quality of mercy. Zel kiyum ha'olam, ki de'isa v'teshev alav be'emes. Where is that from? Anybody know? And you will sit upon it in truth. Anybody know where that's from? It's from the prayer on the high holidays of Unisana Tokesh. The Unisana Tokesh, the prayer when we say, who will live, right, and who will right? Who will buy fire? So in the Hebrew of that prayer, which of course is a prayer of karma, it doesn't say that that entire service seems to be about judgment, like din. It's the day of din, Yom HaDin. It's all Isaac, right? But it doesn't say, and you will sit upon that throne in din. It says that too, but then it ultimately says, "V'teshev alav be'emes." Emet, emes ki ata hu dayan u'mochiach. Right, you will sit on that throne and judge in truth. And you think truth here would intuitively mean the truth of karma, like cause effect. But truth here is being transvalued into not pure like metrics. It's not an accountant that's saying like, hey, the books are not lining up. This truth is not the truth of precision, but the truth which is the balancing point between precision, accountability, and generosity, and unbounded. The truth of the world can only exist with a truth that has room in it for compassion at the right moment, which is beyond the letter of the law, right? It's like the Christian, generosity of spirit, beyond the letter of the law with the letter of the law, mixing together into God's Jacobian, like, that's the way it is, like,
Compassionate justice.
compassionate justice.
Wisdom.
Wisdom, applied truth is wisdom, right? Applied, compassion is the wisdom to know which of these tools to use. Which is the right tool? It's like, that's why it's hard to be a compassionate ruler. Because you have the power to do whatever you want, Mr. President. You have the power. Like, nobody's denying that you are the most powerful person in the world. The question is not, can you behave in a particular way, but should you? If you are held by a quality of mercy, and clearly you have it, you pardoned people that you should not have pardoned, right? I mean, mercy to one group is din to another group. But anyway, without going back to where we were last night for this moment, but like clearly there's something in this text that I wanted you transparently to see about the quality that makes for redemption, and the quality is called truth, but it's not angry, it's not cold, it's wisdom. I can't see if there are people with hands up, but I just wanted to do a little more, and then we'll open it up, okay? I don't know if that person wanted to speak.
Can you change the view to them instead of us?
I'm about to do that. No, Caroline. Caroline, it's okay, go back to the text, it's all good. Just go back to the text. It's good, thank you. There we go. Okay, so let's just go a little bit more, and then we'll come back, we'll open it up, okay? Dehainu midato shel Yaakov shehu midat emet. Right, that is a quality of Jacob who is known as truth. Virachamim, and compassion. And this is great. This is I chose this piece almost entirely for this beautiful teaching that I have in my back pocket all the time. Perush, this he says this reminds me of the great teaching from the holy rabbi, the man of God, Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, the Rimanover, who said, Al HaGemara ne'emar bris b'melach v'ne'emar bris b'yisurim. The Talmud makes a comparison between the covenant of salt and that there's a covenant of suffering. The Talmud in Brachot is having a conversation about different covenants and about suffering itself. And it notices that there's a phrase in the Bible which is that we have to have a covenant with salt, to put salt onto the altar. And there's also a covenant, meaning God makes a commitment, God bless you, around suffering in the book of Deuteronomy. And so it compares these two covenants. And the Talmud says that the Talmud says before the Rimanover, the Talmudic teaching says that the reason why these two covenants are related to one another in the Talmud thematically is because just as salt, when placed upon meat, will actually sweeten the meat, so too suffering has the possibility of sweetening a person. So the Rimanover says, that's great. Let's take that teaching, he says, in the Talmud, and let's take it to its next level, which is where he gets very human. He says, so great. Ma melach im mosif yoser mikishiur I efshar lekabel hana mi'abasar, v'agdavka im nimlach kishiur, kach ayisurin yu mimuzagim sheyicholes lekablam, mimuzagim b'rachamim. He says, just as if you put too much meat too much salt onto the meat, it becomes impossible you can't taste it. In other words, you ruin it, right? Only if you salt it in the right amount can it actually make the meat sweeter. So too with suffering in a human being. If a human being has too much suffering, it can destroy them. Just think about that teaching. And so, how do we salt our lives? You have to know how much of each of the qualities of Abraham and Isaac are appropriate. Too much din, and you ruin the meat. You ruin the soul. And so the Morva Shemesh is saying that the children of Israel were suffering so much in the land of Egypt. Their suffering was so immense that their cries came out to the most powerful leader in the world, who's God. And God heard their suffering. And even though, right, we have earlier in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, there was a promise made that we would become slaves and we would suffer immensely, right? And according to the tradition, it was determined that we were going to have, right, the Bible says 400 years, Arba Me'ot Shana. And according to the tradition, though, it was too much. It was too much suffering. It was only 210 years at this point. We were only halfway through the decree. And we started crying out to God. And God heard our cries. It says that God heard and had mercy. God, as it were, was saying, it's time for me to bring a little Jacob into the picture. It's too much suffering. V'hinei b'mei Yaakov Avinu on the second side, Shaya merkava l'midat tat, shemidat rachamim. He says that in the time of Jacob, even though Jacob was a vehicle for the attribute of tiferet, which is the same as mercy, another word for it. Even so, says, even so, even though he was quote unquote the quality of mercy, in his own lifetime, it wasn't fulfilled. It didn't move from the potential to the actual. Because he was always, his whole life he was suffering. But Me'esav, Lavan, Mibanav, like his whole life, Jacob suffered his whole life. Maybe he brought it upon himself, maybe it was karma. Who knows? But he was certainly, as he said to Pharaoh at the end of the book of Genesis, my whole life has been really, really hard, right? So, he says, and the same thing is true of his children. In suffering, they also didn't experience the quality of Jacob, their ancestor, of our patriarch, until the moment of Geulah Mitzrayim, until the moment of redemption, right? Then compassion began to emerge, right? And that quality of Jacob went from the potential to the actual. Right? He said, that's the meaning of I appeared to them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The El Shaddai. Romei Shaddai Nahyavit Simsum. He says that the quality of El Shaddai is called, it's a mediated quality. It's still constricted and not the full revelation of that quality. The word Shaddai here is from the word dai, enough. And so often in Kabbalah, the name El Shaddai means the exact proportion, but a very limited amount was given. I appeared to them in a limited form of these qualities, but not in the fullest expression. And that is the meaning, Shmi Adonai lo nodati lahem, right? By the name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, I was not known by them means that the quality of Jacob, which is the quality of truth, which is the quality of mercy, was not known to them. Just as Rashi said, it wasn't recognized in the fullest truth, amitut. Right now he comes back to Rashi's statement, which is that I wasn't made known in the full truth of my name. Why is that term used by Rashi, the truth of my name? Because the word truth, right, is very much connected to Jacob. I was not known to them in the fullest meaning of truth, right, that the truth of my promise is known to you because it wasn't yet fully expressed. History had not yet fully revealed the quality of mercy that would be revealed now in the redemption from Egypt. Kakatuv titen emes li'Yaakov, as it says in the phrase, give truth, right? Give truth to Jacob. V'chein emor livnei Israel, ani Adonai. Therefore, tell the children of Israel, ani Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Dehainu shemikan ve'elach yitzgalu rachamim al knesses Yisrael shel midas emes. So, from now on, they will know the true taste of mercy. I loved this teaching. After the bishop this week, and after what she said in front of the most powerful man in the world, most powerful person in the world, and the way that she stood in that truth, and that she didn't chastise him, which maybe some wish she had, take the opportunity so she's in front of him to say all the things that I'm sure she'd like to say, and others would like her to say. And but she said, as I said last night, she came from the place of Micah 6:8, like, what does God ask of you but to act right justly and with mercy and with humility, and that she made this plea for the sake of the cries of the children who are afraid and who are about to be hit with a lot of Yitzchak, Isaac, a lot of din. And she said, I'll stand here and speak emet, speak truth. But it was a truth that was laced with rachamim, with compassion and with mercy, and delivered with what the sages say, divrei chachamim benachat nishma'in, that the words of the wise are heard when they're said in a gentle way. And she said it with generosity and not shame, right? Although it's clear that that's what was experienced, there was a certain shame that became anger, which was also remarkable to see how quickly that transformation happens from shame to anger when you get called out in a very public way. And of course, the implication was you are as far from a merciful person as is imaginable. But she couldn't say that, or it wouldn't have been effective to say that. In fact, it's not even clear if this was effective, and this was about as effective a strategy as you could imagine to speak from that place. And it's just this teaching about the suffering and the salting and the suffering. It's so human from a Rebbe who's trying to speak about what it's like to be a human being. And he himself takes the Talmudic teaching and softens it. Like he unsalted a very salty Talmudic teaching. Like there's a teaching about suffering that says suffering is good for you. And you feel like, really? Like, really? Suffering will sweeten your life? And of course, we know that to be the case to some degree. We know that without suffering, right, that people who have never skinned their knee or don't know what it feels like to have some degree of absence don't really appreciate presence. And we don't know why that is. And it's annoying that we find ourselves in a world with these axiomatic principles that are just, nobody asked us. Like, they could have come to me and they could have said, David, what do you think? Can you appreciate the world without suffering? And I would have said, let's give it a shot. Can there be light without, dark? Let's try it out, And it seems like these things are already hard principles that we have nobody asked us kind of like in a fluid universe, how we would have wanted to congeal. But here we are, we find ourselves in this world of infinite possibilities that have been limited to very specific ones. And he says, too much suffering. Like, I'll take your analogy, and I see your analogy and I raise it. There can be too much suffering.
Who's the Rebbe?
This is the Rimanover, Menachem Mendel of Rimanov, who, by the way, it's interesting, if you look about his lineage in his house, he was a very wealthy Rebbe. He became the house of a very majestic dynasty, known for its opulence. Mm-hmm. But when he died, according to the tradition, when he died, I guess it could be also, it's apocryphal for sure, but it could also be, a lie. But they found on the bottom of his Gucci shoes, whatever they were, his Armani, holes in the bottom of his shoes. And he lived a life. Anyway, so Jacob shows up. All right, we're going to open it up. I'm going to open it up. I just want to, Carolyn, you can, thank you. So the takeaway from the teaching is it started with a textual anomaly, the word nodati, right? And he uses Rashi as a platform to try to understand why El Shaddai, right? The facticity of this, like, is it true? And Rashi seems to soften this blow by saying there's a certain element of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh that was not fully known to the patriarch. And then he goes about Kabbalizing or Kabbalistically explaining the meaning of the three patriarchs who are named in the book of Exodus. And says that each one represents, the first two are extremes. And Jacob, the word emet, which is used in Rashi, that the truth of my promises was not fully actualized until this moment, means the Jacobness, which is the ability to measure how much of each of these two qualities in our lives to be, right, is connected with the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is, right, again, also was, is, and will be. That God's promise is known throughout the fullness of time, and that great leaders and great human minds and great hearts and souls know exactly how to play with generosity and withholding to arrive at that fullness of truth, right? In interactions, in body politic, right? Knowing how to speak truth, also knowing how to say truth, which was what she did. She spoke from truth, about truth in the truthful way. And how it was so powerful to watch that. It's not always the right way, perhaps, and a great wizard knows the moment. But that was the Rimanover this morning. Okay, we're going to go to Wendy and move from Wendy to Rob. Thomas, and then to anyone in the Zumagog as well. So Wendy, speak loudly enough for them to hear on the microphone. Jan.
Okay, 2 points. Point number 1 is that the name Shaddai is used almost exclusively in the book of Breshit rather than the other 4 books. Is that because of what it's limited? And is that the rationale for it?
Yeah, I don't know.
But, right, Shaddai, you
It's not always the case. By the way, it's so funny. The word Shaddai, which is likely connected either to the demonic, shade is in Hebrew means a demon, or the word Shaddai, which means breast. And it's not clear, we don't really know what the name means, right? But in Kabbalah, it'll often be used as a quality of gevura, of withholding, in the way that, or measuring, in the way that the mother's breast will give the exact amount that is needed from the child and not just gush, right, mother's milk and not withhold, but just the right measured amount.
Mhm.
It becomes kind of a measuring device.
Mhm.
And usually that's actually, it's a good thing, right? Gevura in that sense is a good thing because without it, the vessel can't be, like there's too much, right? It measures.
Right.
I don't know why it's not used in other places. It does appear, of course, in the mezuzah. In later traditions, put it on the mezuzah,
Right.
which is an interesting, because the doorpost, of course, is the liminal. It's
Yes.
the place where boundaries are literally,
It's also the narrow place.
and the narrow place. It's like, so, I'm sorry.
And my second point is I thought Tiferet was affiliated with Joseph.
No, Joseph is associated with Yisod, which is also in the middle column, right? But not the same as Jacob. They're connected. All right. I'm sorry, Rob, and then for myself.
This teaching is really amazing. I mean, all the teachings are amazing. This one really blew my mind. Our brothers and sisters in Israel right now are making a decision to let out hostages versus the worst of the worst in the world. And it's like, do you do the right thing? What happened? And it's like, that's what came to my mind. And it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable hard.
In this teaching.
Yeah, it's so hard. Yeah. It's like, all of these systems are trying to imagine real life scenarios where, and give names to the ways that we balance values. Another way of talking about the Sfirot in non-Kabbalistic language is to speak about a system of values that are held in dynamic relationship and tension with one another. I once heard that the word erech in Hebrew, which is value, erech is a weight or a value of something, and the word ma'arefet, which is a system in Hebrew, are obviously from the same exact root. A system, ma'arefet, is a series of values that are held dynamically, like a mobile. There was a great, that John Bradshaw was a great thinker who was the father of the inner child work, and he had a couple of specials on PBS that shaped my life and others. He wrote a book called Homecoming. He also wrote a book called On the Family, which was his bringing to the populace, like the more popular universe, the Murray Bowen system, like systems theory around families and dynamic family systems. And he had on the stage, I remember this, I was 1991, where I saw this on TV. They had like a mobile on the stage, which represented the family, was trying to understand, like, identify patient theory, where one child will take on the pain of the family or scapegoat or whatever it might be. And he was trying to show how dynamic systems are, family systems in particular, but all systems. He would move one part of the mobile and then the rest of the mobile would move. Yeah. So he was trying to point out in a very visual way that a system in Ma'arefet is multiple values being held in tension and in dynamic and dialectical relationship. Like, it's not like one value can be isolated. There's no isolation in the system. Every part of the system moves with every other part of the system. So Chesed and Gevura, right? Chesed, or Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they're all mixed together. So we don't think of balance. A Tai Chi teacher told me this also. You don't think of balance. Healthy balance is not static. always listening, like as attuned to the movement of all the other pieces. I just like a little thing that I'll share with you is, and just to explain something to a lot of the people in the Roman community that don't understand this about me, because I never explained it, so I'll explain. For many years, like I would, at the end of services on Shabbat mornings, I go home and I'm like a shmata for like 3 hours. Like even when, especially when Romemu was really growing, in particular, and like my kids would, like after services, I would want so badly they like the kids to go with them to the park or whatever it was. And my wife would look at me and I'd be like, I was full of energy like an hour before, like I was a kiddish, I was teaching, everything. And I would come home and I would momish, literally fall on the bed. I would like eat something and then I would be like gone for like 3 hours. And no matter what, you couldn't, so like I was just thinking about this last night because when I'm leading Tefillah, I'm listening not just to the music and to what was happening in my own heart and mind, but I'm also listening to the room, trying to balance the room like some kind of equalizer. Like I'm really feeling into what's happening in the room, in different parts of the room, the sounds, the quality. I'm looking at people's faces, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And so the quality of being a dynamic balancer is Yaakov, quote unquote, who absorbs Abraham stuff, Isaac stuff, Lavan stuff, and that image, right, is then retrofit onto all kinds of scenarios. Like great leaders are balancing all of these tensions and these values, right? In Israel in particular, let's say this quality of the preservation and the infinity of one life, right? When Gilad Shalit was released, like over 14, like Sinwar was one of those who was released. And like, you know, how do you balance in, like, you're also not just balancing tensions in the moment, but also temporally, past, present, and future. Like you're trying, you know, every great leader has to think into, every great parent, every great, right? There are some obviously stakes that are much higher, right, than just simple situations, right? Like, you know, in your classroom, right? How do you balance chesed and gvura in the classroom? But yeah, you brought that to a very real place. It's really very powerful. Thank you. Thomas.
Briefly, just you really got me going with the architecture, so I can't resist. And to build
We
on
don't
this,
want you to resist.
to build on this idea of tension and of dynamic equilibrium, there's two thoughts about architecture. The first is there's a kind of false and I think despicable cultural idea of design and architecture, which we see most recently in The Brutalist, which is a despicable film. That design, it really is. It's completely
No, let's not go there.
part because it perpetuates the pernicious lie that design is a form of ecstatic self-expression and self-actualization rather than an act of service. Architects are doctors. They're not artists. And there are no method actor architects who use design to just process their own internal trauma and inflict pain on others. It's a despicable film. It's bad for the Jews.
Tell us what you really think.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
But it's despicable because, like the Fountainhead, like a certain lie about this kind of fascist architect. Adrian Brody is made to be just another fascist, as well as being made to be a Shylock, one who is insufferable because he has suffered. Design is medicine, and architects at best are shamanic. And the best definition of design that I ever heard from my greatest teacher, my version of the Rebbe, a guy called Enrique Walker from Chile. He said, design is the search for constraints. The search for constraints, the deliberate search for constraints. There are two things that are great about that. First, it assumes that in order to search for constraints, you must be free. Like that search comes from a place of liberty, right? I'm looking for my limits from a position of freedom because I'm already liberated. So that's radical. Second, it does say that, you know, building on Abraham and getting to Jacob, there is no such thing as absolute freedom. You know, that's as useless as absolute love. There's no grounding. So you must search for the constraint. But in your dignity and your liberty, you choose which constraint you want, or which constraints. It's a search for plural constraints. So it can be really basic. It can be like, okay, what's the budget, right? Or it can be really profound, like how much daylight do we need to come through those doors there? And the mediation of these very fundamental and these very abstract constraints is the art of design and the medicine of design. It's a search for constraints. Okay, which ones, and then how do we balance them dynamically in a dynamic equilibrium? So that stayed with me forever. Second point is that tense. You can hear the word tense, right? T-E-N-S-E.
I love it.
Right? Tensile, tension. So there are two types of structures, tension structures and compression structures. So a tensile structure is like the Brooklyn Bridge, right? You see the hanging cable, it's in tension. And like a tent, like the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The gift of a tensile structure is there are these things inside every building, every structure called force paths.
Called what?
Force paths. The path that the force takes through the universe. Right? This is engineering. This is not mysticism. Force paths. But it's such a magical phrase. The beautiful thing about a tensile structure, something that is in tension, that hangs like a tent, is that the force path is visible. Literally that hyperbolic line that a tent takes, or that the Brooklyn Bridge takes, that is literally the line of force. So inside that seemingly static structure of the Brooklyn Bridge, or the tent, there are these incredibly dynamic lines of force. And the force is like, it's literally moving all the time at the speed of acceleration. The weight of the Brooklyn Bridge times the weight of the planet Earth actually has this accelerative force path that is moving through the Brooklyn Bridge at all times. So within that stillness of the Rabbi at the Bima or the Brooklyn Bridge is this incredibly dynamic, mobile event of these force paths traveling through. So the blessing of a tensile structure is that the force paths are made visible. Lastly, just because I can't resist, even in a static building like the one we're in, the force paths are still dynamic. This building we're in is in compression. It's a different way of bearing the weight of the world. But the force paths themselves are still taking on that tent shape, that shape of the Brooklyn Bridge, just upside down, because they're in compression, not tension. That's the miracle of Gaudi, because that's how he made that cathedral. He just flipped the tent upside down to make the shape of those hyperbolic arches. So even in a dumb building like this one, there's this extraordinary dynamic tension.
Amazing. All right, I have to know the time, otherwise I'm constrained by the time. What are our time constraints? Is it 9:45?
12 minutes to 10.
12 minutes. So I have to respond to all of that, but I also I want to make space for Marilyn, and then and since Richard hasn't yet spoken, I'm going to skip over, even though I want to hear desperately Jill and Mark, but Richard hasn't spoken yet. So Marilyn, and then Richard, and then I want to say something about that we just said. Marilyn, please, yeah.
I love it because I wanted to talk about time with the time constraints, and Amet is from Aleph to top from the beginning to the end. And I was just thinking that, it's not over until the fat lady sings, that as the story evolves from Genesis, in Genesis, it's time is actually shorter. Like it's the God of El Shaddai. They're almost being nursed by God, and God is more present to them. But by the time you get into Exodus, it's almost like time is stretching out, and you have to remind them that the story isn't over. And I find it sort of interesting because you've been talking about it almost from the perspective of the ruler, the giver, how to balance how much chesed and gevura you want to dole out. But I was thinking of it also the receiver, like what we talked about with Rashi, the receiver, how are we experiencing it? Like maybe it is chesed, but we're maybe experiencing it as gevura. It's only when the story is over, when you see it in a broader sense, and of course, God, asher we got to bring in the future because the future is coming to us now. Anyways, a bit of rambling, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I like a little partial rap. That's good. Yeah, yes, yes, yeah. I want Richard, and then I want to consolidate, and that Richard, go ahead, and then I'll double back.
Yeah, I came across a teaching Hasidic rabbi known as the Or Torah, and he says that the meaning of "I will redeem you from bondage" means that the redemption will come from the bondage itself, from the force of the judgment, that it was the hard force of your oppression so that the predicted 400 years of bondage was fulfilled in only 210 years. And it was the judgment force that brought the brightness. And he gives the example that a handmaiden at the sea saw more than the prophet Ezekiel. So there's something tough or seeking toughness that's found.
Yeah.
It's the very path of exile and oppression that made the Israelites, even the humblest, strong enough to receive the vision of Hashem.
Yeah. Yeah. The notion that din or judgment itself, like the force that can make for a diamond's own strength comes from that force. The notion that we would, it's a very common theme that darkness, especially the darkness that is then the light that is extracted from the darkness, from the din, as it were, is very powerful light, and that's certainly a common theme. I want to come back to to all of that and speak about what happened in the cathedral, in that architectural space in which all of that tension was being held, the tension between the striking visual of this diminutive woman with a soft voice who was elevated, and from the visual, was speaking down, right, from her perch, and to a person who had said that God had chosen him, and because of his survival, was chosen for a purpose, and that Rabbi Joshua Hammerman, who wrote a beautiful blog post, if you want to read an incredible rabbi's writings, Joshua Hammerman, a retired rabbi from Connecticut, who at a very young age was also writing for the New York Times and others. He's just a remarkably talented writer. I just recommend him highly. I don't always agree with everything he says, but so what? It's just incredible to read. And he wrote yesterday powerfully about the religious dimension of the inauguration and the invocation of the divine, and that in a sense was our own invitation as clergy across all our denominational styles and perspectives to also invoke the divine, right? And if you're going to play in the field of God, let's go there. And what does God ask of us, quoting Micah or Micha 6:8, but to walk humbly with God, and to act with mercy and with justice and compassion. And based upon that, to say that, to see that visual of her speaking down, not because she was condescending, but because the moral dimension, right, of ideally in religious tradition, should be invoked in quite this way. That even in the book of Deuteronomy, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, the king, the most powerful person in the Torah, is held by obligated to read from the Torah. The Torah, right, is the reminder of their own, that they are brother with, sister with, part of the collective, right? And that is ultimately, it was arresting in the best way. And the image also of tension between, right, one can argue and cogently argue that having open borders is chesed, right? Without any borders whatsoever, we're in big trouble, right? One can argue that economically, culturally, having no borders, meaning no Isaac, right? Having all Isaac, right? A wall, there's no getting in and no getting out. That's the image of the rabbis of Egypt. Nobody got in and got out. Egypt was sealed. But the way to set up those boundaries and to remember mercy and to be compassionate towards the 300,000 or so, right, whose parents are standing to be, right, like just the way to think about it from a place of love, recognizing the importance of both of these values and holding them in tension and holding those in tension, then choosing to come from a place of mercy, a place of the most humane and the most compassionate way to be with other human beings. It's just, again, that's what it is to be a wizard. And so just last thing I'm going to say is that I've been thinking for a couple of years to have a podcast now that, and I've been at the Y now for 2 years, and we've been thinking about having a podcast because I don't give sermons at the Y, and I'd like to. And so we've been thinking about names for a long time, and I had like a list of 20 names. One of them was like the wise guy. I thought that's like too, I don't know, too soprano, I don't know, too, you know. And then there are names like, you know, all kinds of names. I had like 20, 30 names. And my sister-in-law, who does this for a living, she's like in the podcast and other media spaces. I asked her opinion about it, and she gave her opinion about all the names that I had. And then just 2 nights ago, she sent me a text like late in the morning for me. It was like her night in California. And she's like, I got it. I got the name. And I looked it up and there's no other name for it. And the name of the podcast that she came up with is Intention Seeker. Intention Seeker. And I sat with it, I was like, intention seeker, intention, because it's playing on attention seeker. Like, I don't like that. But the intention, and I just kept, and it became more and more like, oh, that was